Hello, I'm Jenny Fern and welcome to my library. I'm a chaotic neutral mechanical engineer who's really into permaculture and wants to talk about books. And today we are doing the full year reading wrap up. These are the books that I read this year that I own physically, and then there's a lot that I read from the library as well. I logged 118 books as of today. Let's go over my goals for this year. Just at the beginning, we'll go over my goals, what I did, and I guess some stats, I suppose, and then we'll get into a brief description of every single book. So I was saying that I had tracked 118 books. I know that I also read like 20 children's picture books that I did not log. I don't just read like adult fiction or nonfiction. I read children's works and manga, graphic novels, that kind of stuff. So just take the number with a grain of salt if you're comparing me to yourself or to other people, which please don't do that because there's no point. You want to say hi? My first goal was to read more from my shelves or from the thrift store hauls that I have. I was hoping to read 35 to 40% of my books in that way. I very much doubt that I hit that goal. Maybe I was more around 30%. I have a plan of attack, considering how this year went, for how to address this next year. So stay tuned for my goals video for next year. Subscribe if you want to see when that comes out. I also wanted to read more science fiction, and I had a goal of 2 per month, which was lofty. In retrospect, I only read 8 science fiction books, so I definitely fell behind on that goal. I don't know. I think I have an idea of what went wrong here, and I think I used to follow some people who were really science fiction focused. There was a channel, it was called like Books and Pieces. She had wonderful recommendations for science fiction books. Her channel doesn't exist anymore, but I think finding a channel similar to that will be really important for me in just finding a love for science fiction again. I do love science fiction. I just haven't felt like called to it very much. My third goal was to read more old and obscure books, and I did definitely read old and obscure books. There was a period of time where I just completely disregarded my goals, and I filmed 2 videos out of that. One was reading graphic novels, reading like popular cozy graphic novels, and the other video was reading YA dystopian novels. And both of those were pretty against my goals, if we're being completely honest. So I went a little off the rails at some point in summer. My fourth goal was to maintain variety, and I think when we go through the different types of books that I read, you will see that I definitely maintained variety. The fifth goal was I set my Goodreads goal at 50 books, but the theme for the year was to read books that I think I'll enjoy, and then also read books that will expand my experience, my reading experience. And I think the graphic novel YA dystopian really fits that, books that will expand my reading experience, because it's kind of about exploring. I think my theme was like enjoy and explore or something like that. Obviously I failed my goals to some extent, although I guess I could really power through and read a bunch of sci-fi from my shelves within the next couple weeks, and then I could meet the goal, but that's not really the point. And then I had some video goals, which I'll also just go through here. One was to release 1 video per week, and I did that. So super proud of myself for finding a flow of editing and releasing that works for me so that I can maintain it for over a year now. The second was to post videos to attract people, new people, and then also post videos to like retain my key audience and keep them engaged and involved. I don't think I did a super great job at making videos to attract people. I started just like wanting to do whatever I wanted, you know, and there are some like kind of advice-y type videos that I would like to do. I would especially like to do more videos that help people who are not currently readers figure out what works for them and how they can read books if that's what they want to do. The third goal was to do themed reading vlogs, and I definitely achieved this goal. I released several themed reading vlogs, and I have several in the works as well. Oh, okay. I was trying to show you that Al was climbing up the blinds. And my fourth goal, which I was a little embarrassed to say out loud, was to reach 500 subscribers, and I did that thanks to all of you. Thank you all so much. Again, I released a series of videos that were celebrating 500 subscribers, and I'm still so grateful for everybody who's here. I can see you guys that when I release a video, some of you watch it right away, you like it, you leave a comment. It's so nice. It's so supportive, and I really appreciate you. I never film in this area, and it's a problem because I can see Al being an absolute goofball on the couch. Oh my god, he's gonna eat my book. One second. I had to go save the books that I'm planning to read this month, or at least finish this month, from the grips of our tiny kitten. The last like bonus goal was to start photographing my books again, and I did. I took some photographs of books this year. Overall, I'm very happy with how the reading year went and what I did, and I don't really have regrets. I just have things that I've observed with myself and my behavior that I think I can be more successful next year, hopefully, if I tweak some of my approach to things. I might be missing books from here, and I might be missing books from just like not logging them. I did realize there were several books that I didn't put a date, and so they didn't count for like this year's goal, and I was like, oh gosh, I might just forget that I read that book this year. Anyway, let's go into the breakdown of what all of the books that I read, like what their category was. 8 memoirs, or something that's close to a memoir that I felt comfortable putting it in that category. And for nonfiction in general, I read 10 books, so I guess that's 18 total nonfiction-y type books. I read 7 books that were translated fiction, and for general fiction I read 9 books. I read 12 classics, or something that I'm putting into the classics category. I only read 8 science fiction books, and some of them I'm pretty unconfident in even calling them science fiction. Give or take some books in that category. The one that I'm sure of, and that I read the absolute most of, is manga. I read 31 manga this year. Last year was the very first year that I ever picked up a manga. And I think it was the first book that I read that year was Witch Hat Atelier. And I just was like, this medium it just works for me. I have such a wonderful time reading manga. And they're so short, and they're not a complete story in themselves. I mean, sometimes they are, but they are just so bingeable. I read 1 book of poetry. I read 2 short story collections, 5 plays, and plays, I feel like I want to read more plays in the future. I feel like they're a little underrated. 11 children's fiction, so that included some picture books, some middle grade books, plus 20 completely uncounted picture books. I did a reading vlog on them. I chose not to log them because I don't know why, but I didn't put them all in, so there's also 20 books from a reading vlog that you can see what I read. I'm not going to talk about them today, unfortunately. And 9 graphic novels, 5 YA dystopians. We are so deep into this, I wonder if I should split it into 2 videos already. Now let's transfer over to the couch and go through every single book, that I read this year. I'm gonna try to do this exactly like last year, where I go through everything month by month and I do a real quick reading and just brief discussion. We have over 100 books to get through, so let's just start going. I have the largest stack here for January, which is not surprising because I have so much like excitement for reading. I feel like January is really like, I'm gonna read. And I also start in December. I start my reading year December 25th. I've done that for the last 2 years because I have time off during that period. So I'm like, I want to start now. And so I end my reading year early as well. So the first book that I read this year was so excellent. It was The Gift of the Deer by Helen Hoover, and I gave this 5 stars. This book made me cry. This book was such a beautiful exploration of nature and humans' impact on the world around them and our relationships with wild animals. And I just loved it. I just loved it so much. This is one of my favorite books that I read this year. Super far departure, kind of. Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. I gave this 5 stars as well, and it is just the complete different side of me from The Gift of the Deer. This is wild. This is triggering. If you want to look those up, this surely do that before you read this. The thing about it is that at the beginning I'm like, okay, some weird stuff, but I'm on board. We have a boy who has some junk mail in his mouth, and I feel like it's really loud. Oh, there's a cat in our front yard. Oh, Wild Ride. I was there for it the entire time. I can totally understand that this might not be for some people. Then I read Sparks Like Stars by Nadia Hashimi. I gave this, I gotta take the mail away from the boy. Sorry, had to deal with that before it got untenable. Sparks Like Stars by Nadia Hashimi. I gave this 4 stars. This book was out of my comfort zone, but it was really a good experience, and I'm happy that I read this book. So this follows a fictional story about a young girl who is there for and experiences a coup in 1978 Afghanistan. I really appreciated hearing this story. I listened to it on audiobook, and I thought it was good. Next I read Across the River and Into the Trees by Ernest Hemingway. This is not what I wanted, but I accepted it as it was, and I gave it 4 stars. This is about an older man who, I think he was in World War I. He is hanging out in Italy with this 18-year-old, I think, girl, and he's hanging out with her. He's her lover, whatever. It was kind of interesting. No. Yeah. The kitten life is a choice. See, last year I didn't have a kitten, and I feel like it went way more smoothly. There was some wonderful writing in here and some wonderful lines and descriptions, and so I will take it as it is. Then I read Berserk Volume 1. I gave this 4 stars. This is by Kentaro Miura and is just a classic manga. It is one of the like most recommended classic manga. It's incredibly violent, and I did read several more volumes, but I had a little bit of a falling out. I did a video where I read your manga recommendations, and this was a really fun way to start the year because I was able to explore several new manga right from the beginning and see what I wanted to dive into. I also read A Sign of Affection Volume 1 by Sue Morishita, and I gave this 4 stars. This was so cute, and I wasn't expecting to think it was so cute, but I did. I also read Every Falling Star, which was a story, an account of a boy who turns into a man who escapes North Korea. And he talks about famine and the conditions that he experienced when he was in North Korea. This is by Sungju Lee, and I gave it 4 stars. Again, a little outside of my comfort zone, but I really appreciated what I read. I read another manga, Cardcaptor Sakura. I gave this 5 stars. I really should pick up the second volume because I had a wonderful time. I love Bee and Puppy Cat, and Cardcaptor Sakura is like a quintessential magical girl story. So it's very fun. There's fun outfits. It's just cute as hell. Next, I read an underwhelming book called There Is No Dog by Meg Rossif. I gave this 3 stars. It just didn't hit right. It was a fun story about a god who is just kind of petulant and he's just acting like a child. I enjoyed some of it, but it really didn't leave that much of an impact. I read volume 5 of Spy Family. I have fallen off of Spy Family recently. I haven't kept up with it. Okay, the boy is throwing a tantrum. Sometimes he gets so crazy. Spy Family, I read volume 5. I gave it 5 stars. I love Spy Family. I started reading it last year. I really, really like Spy Family. Anya is one of my favorite characters. So try it if you would like a super fun manga to experience. Then I read Pluto Volume 1. I got 3 volumes of Pluto because they aren't offered through my library, but I watched the anime and I know that I love the story. So I felt confident in buying some physical copies and I really enjoyed it. So I gave both volume 1 and volume 2 I read shortly after that. I gave both of these 5 stars. This is a series about robots. I guess it's like a follow-on from Astro Boy, but it's about all of these like very powerful robots. There has been this immense robot war, and this is kind of in the aftermath of that. There are explorations of like anti-robot sentiment. There is a slew of murders of both these really powerful robots and people, like humans associated with robots. And it's a mystery of like trying to solve what is the reason why these robots are being murdered. And the story is just so whole and explores a lot of cool things, and I really recommend Pluto. I read Berserk Volume 2. I gave this 4 stars. I think my main reason for rating Berserk instead of 5 stars is because it's just so violent and so graphically violent. It's not exactly for me and my tastes. Then I read an excellent nonfiction book called The Geography of Nowhere by James Howard Kunstler. I gave this 5 stars. This is so many 5 stars for 1 month, but they're all so well deserved. This book is a wonderful exploration of the design of American suburbs and our cities and like car-centric design, and it gives like historical context for why we have what we have now and also ideas of what we could have in the future. I loved this book and it really resonated with me. And I finally finished reading The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides. I have mixed feelings about this book, definitely. There's some aspects that I think are just wonderful, wonderful. And then there's something about it that just makes it impossible for me to give it 5 stars. So I left this book unrated and I stand by that. I don't know. I don't know. I'm so conflicted. I would say read it if it sounds like something that you want to read. It's about these sisters and they all end up killing themselves. That's pretty well known from the beginning, but this is the story about how they were perceived by a group of neighborhood boys. Maybe one of the more surprising reads of this year in terms of how much I enjoyed it, that's The Hot Zone by Richard Preston. This is all about the Ebola virus and related viruses to Ebola and how they spread and levels of containment, how that stuff works, how outbreaks work. And it follows a few different stories that were really important with regards to Ebola. And I really, really enjoyed this. It's kind of like an X-Files. I said this a few times when I was reading it, but it's so reminiscent of like an X-Files story that I think people who are into that kind of stuff would also like this, even though it's nonfiction. I give this 4 stars. Then I read Black Swans by Eve Babbitt. It looks like I didn't rate this. If I had to rate it, I would rate it 3 stars. I did not enjoy it. This is a series of like kind of essay, kind of memoir work by the writer Eve Babbitt, who was a contemporary of Joan Didion. I think she's kind of coming into some popularity in recent years, and there's like this common comparison of her and Joan Didion. I've never read anything by Joan Didion, and I just don't think Eve Babbitt is for me. I didn't like how she saw the world, to be perfectly frank, and that's about it. I read Berserk Volume 3. I gave this 4 stars. Not much to say. Then the last book for January was Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. This is the first book I've ever read by Octavia E. Butler, and it blew me away. I give this 5 stars. I loved it so much. I read this so quickly. I feel like I read it in like a matter of days, like a couple days, because I was so entrenched in this story. It is a near future. I mean, it's set in like 2024, 2026. It was written in 1993. It is so close to our current situation, and it's about climate crises. It's about like crises of inequality, and it is excellent. It is so good. I would love to finish out this series, and I just don't know when I'm gonna get to that, but I really enjoyed this. Now we're in February, and we start off with more manga. I know I went so hard this year, but that's Samari and the Guardian of the Forest by Yako Garashi, and this was volume 4. I read the first 3 volumes last year, and I was really on the fence because I had this horrible curse when I was reading this that I just kept falling asleep. Like, it just could not grip me. For some reason, I had the hardest time with it. Volume 4 I didn't rate, but then shortly after that I read volume 5, and I rated it 5 stars. So I don't know what happened, but apparently I loved it, and I guess after that I was on board for Samari and the Guardian of the Forest. It is such a cute concept. It's about this little girl in a world of monsters, and she is disguising herself as a monster so that she won't get eaten. And she is traveling with this golem who is a protector of the forest, and he is very, very old, and he's trying to keep her safe. Next, I read this collection of haiku. I really enjoyed myself. I had such a great time exploring the medium of haiku. I love haiku. I've loved them in the past as well, and it was really beautiful reading some classic works, and I ended up writing some of my own as well, which I've threatened to make a video about here, and I never did. So anyway, maybe at some point I will do that. Then I read A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. Had a wonderful time with this. This is like an extended essay about what women need to be able to write, and basically it's some sense of security and a room of one's own. I loved hearing about this perspective, this historical perspective on like women just starting to become writers, and really women beginning to have rights, and how that opens up their ability to be creative, artistic people. So anyway, I really recommend this. I really enjoyed this. This was the first Virginia Woolf that I ever read, and I haven't read anything else yet either. I gave that 4 stars. Then I read Spy Family Volume 6, and I gave it 5 stars. Again, love that series. I read Berserk Volume 4, and I didn't rate it. Don't know why. maybe something crazy happened. And then I read a collection of short stories called A Wild Swan by Michael Cunningham. This is retellings of fairy tales, and this just did not hit for me. I was not interested. It has beautiful illustrations. The cover art is beautiful. This is a beautiful book physically, but the words and the stories I was not interested in at all. I give it 2 stars. Then I read Rental Person Who Does Nothing by Shoji Morimoto. This is an exploration of a man who has put himself up for rent on Twitter. And his stipulation is that he's not being paid. He is going to show up, you pay for his travel, and you pay for the food if it's required for the event. And he agrees that he will do nothing with you. There's no expectation of exchange. It made me think a lot. I left it unrated, but I recommend this book for sure. That's all for February. The first book that I finished in March was The Hoodoo, a play by Walter Ben Hare. Full disclosure, right from the beginning, this is a play that features blackface. And I read this because it was a play that my great-grandmother was in when she was in high school. Isn't history so disturbing sometimes? Anyway, The Hoodoo was actually a play that I found somewhat entertaining. Obviously, I did not find the blackface funny. That was really, like, could this play please remove this and be somewhat decent? And the answer was no. So anyway, I left this unrated. I don't recommend it. I definitely don't recommend it. The next book was The Seawolf by Jack London. I have tricky feelings about this. I think this is my second favorite Jack London I ever read. I loved John Barleycorn so much, and it made me want to read his fiction work. And The Seawolf has some really wonderful conversations about morality, humanity. The plot is a little weird. So, anyway, it's good. I give it 4 stars. Then I got into my physics era and I read Reality Is Not What It Seems by Carlo Rovelli. This is about quantum gravity, and it's so readable, so approachable, and a really wonderful way to start looking at quantum mechanics. Really, really enjoyed this. I give it 5 stars. Then I read Samari and the Guardian of the Forest, Volume 6, and I gave this 4 stars. Next I read Helgoland, also by Carlo Rovelli, and I gave this 4 stars. This is also about quantum mechanics. Its subtitle is Making Sense of the Quantum Revolution. Then I finished Red Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson, and I wanted to love this book, and I wanted to be so excited and read all of the following Mars books, and I didn't love this book. I give this 3 stars. And look at how fucking long it is and how much text is on each page, and I didn't love it, so I'm that one's a disappointment for sure. Then I read another excellent Carlo Rovelli book. It's The Order of Time. This is all about time, and it is amazing, and I gave this 4 stars. All right, let's dive into April now. So at the beginning of April, I finished reading the second play that my great-grandmother was in that also featured blackface. So that's Much Ado About Betty by Walter Ben Hare. I thought this play was downright terrible. It's so messy and so bad. I didn't rate it as well. I guess I could have done a 1 star. I don't know. It just seems really weird to rate a play that has blackface in it. The next book I read is a classic, and that's The Good Earth by Pearl S. Buck. Weird experience with this because it was so readable. I couldn't put it down. I kept wanting to read it, but the story was really weird and like uncomfortable. This is about a Chinese peasant farmer and like the course of his life. And his relationships are really weird. But I ended up giving it 4 stars. Then I read one of my favorites from this year, and it feels like I read this so long ago because I just feel like this has been in my life for a while. My mail is being delivered right now. My blinds are so wide open. Before I got distracted, I was talking about Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I loved this. The writing was so good. So I feel like if I just read a couple of these lines from here, it'll help explain what this book is about, because it's really about like the black experience in America, but this is a good way to say it. What is it like to inhabit a black body and find a way to live within it? And how can we all honestly reckon with this fraught history and free ourselves from its burden? Between the World and Me is Ta-Nehisi Coates' attempt to answer these questions in a letter to his adolescent son. And it's just beautifully written. Then I read a real stinker of a book. I didn't enjoy this. It was Mr. Mo's Traveling Couch by Dai Sijie, and I give it 3 stars. This was just so confusing, and the plot, I'm like, what was the point? It's about this French Chinese man who is a psychoanalyst, and he is returning to China. He's like obsessed with Freud, and the plot is just really weird. Don't recommend this. Then I read The Radleys by Matt Haig. This is about a family of vampires living in suburban England, and it was fun. It was very TV show. It was very readable, and I had a fun time with it. It's honestly not super similar to work that I usually read, but yeah, fun. I give it 4 stars. Then I read Witch Hat Atelier Volume 11, and I gave this 4 stars. Oh my god. And I give this 4 stars. I really, really enjoy Witch Hat Atelier. Then I read Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, which is a sequel to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. This is by Roald Dahl. And this one is weird, as you could imagine. They go up to space, to a space hotel, which I thought would be super fun. And then they come back and they're in the factory, and there's some like really fun exploration of like math concepts, strangely enough. This was okay. There is some problematic material at the beginning, which isn't super fun to read, but otherwise it was okay. I did not rate it. This was a mistake. I read a book so deep into a series. I did not realize that this was deep into a series. This is Second Stage Lensman by E.E. Docksmith, and there's a whole history of Lensman. So Second Stage Lensman is in that. This book sexism is present. There was some really fun content in this book with regards to they go to a planet full of naked women, and men are absolutely reviled there. Overall, it was just kind of stupid. I gave it 3 stars. I also read The Jot and the Line by Norton Jester, and this is a cute picture book that talks about dots and lines, and it's all about geometry and like a love for geometry. I don't know, it's okay. I don't really recommend it. It was fine though. I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Flying Witch Volume 6. I also started Flying Witch last year. It's a comfort read. Volume 6 I didn't rate. I don't know why. I think I maybe just didn't know what to rate it. Then here are some children's books that I did end up logging. One is The Gas We Pass, the story of farts by Shinta Cho, and I loved this book, and I gave it 5 stars. I think it's very, very fun illustrations. I also read the classic Are You My Mother by P.D. Eastman. I really enjoyed this. It was very emotional, but I didn't end up rating it. And the last book for this month is The Factory by Hiroko Oyamada. And I loved this book. This was one of my favorites for this year. I just loved it. It's a surreal factory. There's 3 perspectives of people who work at this factory, and it's just like perfectly captures the like mundanity and weirdness of working every day. I really enjoyed it. I give it 5 stars. For May, I read Teaching a Stone to Talk by Annie Dillard. I loved Pilgrim at Tinker Creek last year, so I thought I would love this, and I didn't. I was very disappointed by this. I gave it 3 stars. It is also nature writings, but she's going through some weird, like, religious, trying to find herself thing that I just did not resonate with at all. Then I read Berserk Volume 5, and I gave it 4 stars. I got into another round of sampling manga series, so I also read Demons of the Shadow Realm by Hiromu Arakawa, and found out that I was not interested in pursuing this series. I gave it 3 stars. There was just like a lot going on, and it was not really for me. I also read Monstrous Devices, a middle grade story about toy robots, and connecting it with the like story or mythology of the Golem, and I gave this 3 stars. This was when I first read Frieren. I read Frieren Volume 1, and I gave it 4 stars. This is by Kanehito Yamada, illustrated by Tsukasa Abe. I love this series. I am so into this series. It is so good. It's so good. It's about an elf who was a part of an adventuring party, like a D&D adventuring party, but in real life, right? And she has seen her old adventuring party die because she has a much longer lifespan than them. And she had such an impact. It had such an impact in her life, those 10 years that she spent with this party when she was younger. And she is set out to finish what they started, basically. And so she has the beginnings of a new adventuring party. And I love this story. I love so much about this story. So anyway, I recommend it. I read Flying Witch Volume 7, and I gave that 4 stars. And I read Black Hole Survival Guide by Jana Levin, and I gave that 4 stars. That is a nonfiction physics book about how to survive a black hole, basically. I really wanted it to lean more into the survival guide aspect, like be more cheeky than I thought it was. I thought it was more just a real physics nonfiction book, but I did really enjoy it, and I did learn quite a bit. I read Berserk Volume 6. I rated that 4 stars. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm a little over Berserk at this point, so I'm having a hard time being like objective with like these stories and these ratings because I don't care about the backstory. I just want to see what's going on now. Oh my god, you're so loud. I started June on accident. Apparently, what is that? May? Apparently May was like one of my worst reading months, which makes sense because I think I was in a bit of a slump after reading this and being so disappointed by it. He's so happy, but he's so loud. So it looks like I read quite a bit in June because I was just like clicking through to see when June ended, and it looks like I read a lot. I read Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I don't own Project Hail Mary, but I gave it 5 stars. So it was really good. I just think I could probably pick it up at like a thrift store somewhere. So I'm waiting, I suppose. This is a book by the author who wrote The Martian, and I love The Martian. Project Hail Mary is about this guy. He is on a ship, he's alone, and he doesn't really know what his situation is. So it's kind of like figuring out what's going on and surviving, I suppose. Yeah, it was good. 5 stars. I also read Necessary Trouble by Drew Gilpin Faust. It is a memoir. The tagline is growing up at mid-century. So it is really all about like her life in the context of history, and then also like her family's life in the context of history. I thought it was good. Not necessarily something that I would have picked up if it wasn't for a reading completely random books from the library, but I gave it 4 stars. Then I read A Misfortune Freeman by Elizabeth Yates, which was also a completely random selection from the library, and I thought it'll be fine. It won a Newbery. It is about slavery, so maybe it'll be educational, something like that. This book is so bad. I gave it 1 star. This book justifies slavery. It's so bad. It's so bad. It's so bad. So anyway, terrible, terrible propaganda. Horrible book. Couldn't not recommend it enough. Then I read Frieren Volume 2, and I gave it 4 stars. And then I read Foundation by Isaac Asimov. I also don't own this book. It was good, but I got really confused when I was reading it. The first part of this book I really, really enjoyed, and I just got confused by the structure of this book, so I should probably reread it, but I ended up giving it 4 stars. And then I read A Bitter Magic by Roderick Townley, and this was good. This is a solid middle grade about a young girl whose mother is missing, and she is living with like her illusionist uncle, and there's some interesting things about class. It's a very dark book, actually. I ended up giving this 4 stars. And then I read one of my favorites from this year. Maybe unexpected for those of you who haven't watched my channel, but for those of you who have, I think you'll understand that it's Dark Princess by W.E.B. Du Bois. And I feel a little bit hesitant recommending this book because I know a lot of people have not enjoyed their time with it, but I so enjoyed my time with this. So if you know anything that's similar to Dark Princess by W.E.B. Du Bois in terms of like its internationalism and its scheming, its conspiratorial nature, let me know. I'm not sure how to go into this book without saying a lot about the plot. It's historical in that it's quite old. This is from 1928, but also in what happens in the book. Like, I don't know, it's just so good. I loved it so much. So anyway, 5 stars. Then another 5-star, Strange Interlude by Eugene O'Neill. I really enjoyed this play. It's a very long play. It's experimental. It's all about people's inner monologues, and it's about this woman, Nina, her relationships with various men. I really, really enjoyed this. I loved the character of Nina, and I gave it 5 stars. Then I read Flying Witch Volume 8, and I gave it 4 stars. And then I read Sheets by Brenna Thumler, and I gave it 4 stars. Oh, I think we're probably into another month, so let me check. July, I read a lot, I think. So July was the month when I finally finished reading Anne of Green Gables. I love Anne. I love Anne. She's such a good character. And this book is lovely. There is such a light and playfulness and also like elements of like growing up and being responsible. It's very, very good. I highly, highly recommend this classic for everybody. Then I read another graphic novel, Bloom by Kevin Panetta. I thought this was very well done. I gave it 4 stars. It's like a coming of age story. Then I read Mooncakes by Suzanne Walker, and I did not like this at all. I gave it 3 stars, though I feel like I was a little generous. Then I read my favorite graphic novel that I've read so far, and one of my favorites for this year, that is Snapdragon by Kat Lay. Love this. Can't recommend this enough. It is so complete of a world, of a story, of a family. I love how the characters are interconnected. I love the characters in this story and their situations. The setting is so beautiful. I highly recommend this. This is about a little girl who stumbles upon a witch, and she ends up hanging out with this old woman more and more, and it's just beautiful. It's just a beautiful story. I also read Mamo by Sass Millage, and this was very good as well, but the pacing was a little weird. This is about a girl who is helping a witch with a curse upon the town, like helping relieve that curse. The visuals I thought were very good, and the idea of the story I also really enjoyed. There were some shortcomings. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I also read Pumpkinheads by Rainbow Rowell, another graphic novel. This was totally fine, totally good story, but just not exactly for me. It's, again, more of like a coming of age, like just before going to college story, and I gave it 4 stars. My god, I just realized one of the reasons why I didn't pull this book out. I saw this book on my shelf this morning and I was like, why didn't I pull it? And I pulled it and I put it in the stack. Anya's Ghost by Vera Brogsoll. I clearly forgot to log this book, so I've read more books than I thought I did. Anyway, Anya's Ghost is a really good graphic novel about a Russian immigrant girl who stumbles upon a ghost, and this ghost hangs out with her, is her friend, and things take a turn. And I really enjoyed this. So anyway, if you're looking for something kind of spooky, I recommend Anya's Ghost. I also read a Star Trek Voyager novel called The Escape, and I love the Voyager series. It's my favorite Star Trek series. I love Captain Janeway, and The Escape is a fun story where there's a guy, an alien guy, who is bopping around in time on this little spaceship. And there's also gosh, who is it? It's like B'Elanna, Kim, but there's a third character that's also trapped back in time in the civilization. So it's a time travel story. It's very fun, and I enjoyed it. I give it 4 stars. I read Birthmarked by Kara M. O'Brien, and this was the start of my YA dystopian era. I did not enjoy this book. I actually saw the second book in this series at the thrift store and very intentionally did not buy it because I don't want this in my life. I didn't end up rating it, but I didn't enjoy it. I read The Hunger Games. This was a reread. I read it once before, near to when it came out, and I thought it was bad at the time. I rated it 2 stars because mostly I thought the writing of the setting was not good, and I kind of agree with that still. But I ended up giving it 4 stars this time. I think it's a solid novel, and I think the characters really shine in this book. I read Partials by Dan Wells. This is about like these modified humans, and there was like this war between, you know, regular people and then these like modified people, and this is like the apocalypse after that, like the post-apocalyptic feeling. Anyway, I also didn't think this was very good, and I didn't end up rating it. And I also read Crime and Punishment during this time period, and this is by Fyodor Dostoevsky, and gosh, how do I feel about this? I'm happy that I read it. I'm really happy that I read it. I really enjoyed the beginning of this book, and that might be because I reread the beginning of this book because I'd started it previously. But I think if I want to really get this book, I'd have to reread it, and that seems pretty daunting. This was a bit of a slog, but I did enjoy when I was reading it. It's just the aftermath and like not fully getting what happened. Certain plot lines I really understood, like our main guy, our main killer, his plot line I followed, but there are these other things that happened that I'm like, what the fuck is going on? So anyway, mixed feelings, but I rated it 4 stars. I did enjoy it. I also read Legend by Marie Lu, and I enjoyed this. I thought this was good. I gave this 4 stars. I am curious about the rest of the story. I might read this series. Then I read The Garden Jungle, or Gardening to Save the Planet by Dave Goulson. Love this. Really recommend this. Love insects. Love having a garden that supports different types of life. So I recommend this. I also specifically think there was a section all about like these really small water features, like these little pools of water that exist like in trees, and that was really, really cool. There's a lot of cool insect stuff in here. I rated this 5 stars. I then finally read my copy of Pluto Volume 3, so I don't have any more volumes of Pluto to read that I own, so I'll have to buy more if I want to continue with this series, which I do. I would love to read the whole series. But anyway, loved this, gave it 5 stars. And I finished reading Under the Never Sky by Veronica Rossi. I also didn't like this. I think, oh man, I really didn't like this one. I thought it was pretty bad and I did not read it. Then I read The Swedish Art of Aging Exuberantly by Margareta Magnusson. This is the author of The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning. This was good. It's very short. It's a perspective you don't get very much. You don't really hear that much from like elderly people in writing, and I really appreciated getting that exposure. The structure of the book was a little strange, but I accepted it and I gave it 4 stars. We come to one of my absolute favorites this year, and a favorite of all time at this point. This is Wind, Sand, and Stars by Anton de Saint-Exupéry. Oh my god! This book is so good! This book is so good. There is a reading vlog where I go through my journey of reading this book. There's just like no words. This is by the author of The Little Prince, and if you're a fan of The Little Prince, I really recommend you read this. This goes through his real experience of crashing in the Sahara and almost dying of thirst. And there's just so much of that experience that informs The Little Prince, as you can imagine. This book was just so good for me, and I really recommend it. 5 stars. Then I read Frieren Volume 3, and I also really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. And I read this cute little book. I love this book in terms of its design, and that's The Emissary by Yoko Tawada. I also really enjoyed the content of this book. It's very short, so there's not like a ton to grip onto, but I did give it 4 stars. It's like a fun little, like dystopian. It's just a good experience being in the world of this book. And in August, I also read The White Book by Han Kang, and I rated this 4 stars. So it's about the death of an infant and the exploration of that death in terms of the color white. It's a very experimental work, and I really enjoyed it for what it was. So in September, I started the month off with something I hated, and that was Night of the Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones. I give this 2 stars. This cemented for me that me and Stephen Graham Jones are not compatible. I don't recommend it. I know a lot of people love it. A lot of people love it. It's kind of silly. It's a silly-ish story about a boy who just like starts killing all of his friends. I just cannot separate myself from like the horror of like how tragic and sad that is. And then the tone of the book was just not that. Then I read The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and I really loved this. I really loved this story. I thought it was so good. And it wasn't until I was putting it up on my shelf in its like chronological order that I realized how old this story really is. It's such a classic, such an old story, but it is so relevant to today in some ways. I gave it 4 stars. Then I read The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, and I would love to read more from Shirley Jackson. This is my first Shirley Jackson, and I loved this. I thought it was so good. I gave this 4 stars. The character, gosh, I can't remember her name, but like the character, I loved her. I like related to her. And then at the end I was like, oh, okay, I guess I relate to her, huh? I also read The Vegetarian, also by Hong Kong, and I gave this 4 stars. This was an experience of a book. This was an experience, and I'm glad I read it, but it's a little weird, and yeah, 4 stars is what it gets. Then I started to get like really into Frieren, and I read volume 4, and I gave it 5 stars. I think this was the volume where I realized, I was like, oh my god, this is like playing Breath of the Wild, but reading it as like completely different characters. Oh, I loved it. I wish I owned this book. I'm so sad I can't hold this up right now. That's Moon of the Crusted Snow by Wabgishig Rice. This is such a good story. This is like, if you want to read like an apocalypse tale, I recommended this book a lot. I thought it was so good. It is about a Canadian Indigenous community and how it experiences an apocalypse. And it's just a darn good apocalypse tale. I give it 5 stars. I also read Little Eyes by Samantha Schweblin, which I do own. This, I've talked a lot about this since I read it. This is about these little objects, these little toys that have cameras in them. And you can sign up to be a watcher, and you get connected with somebody who owns this object. And they're kind of like a little pet, but it's connecting these 2 people in a way where they don't really talk to each other, but they have this relationship. Weird concept. Love the concept. This book explores several stories of this relationship, and oh, it's just so creepy in some ways, and then in other ways it's just so human. It's just such a human book. So highly recommend this. I gave it 4 stars. Then I read this collection of weird stories. This is The Foundling and Other Stories of Peardane by Lloyd Alexander. After I read this, I saw some more stuff about Lloyd Alexander, so I suppose he's like a well-known author. This is stories based on Welsh mythology, and I did enjoy my time with this, but it was just a little weird. Like, the stories are really short, and they have like a little point to them. They definitely are like parables, but I did enjoy my time. And then I returned to my days of reading Orson Scott Card with Shadow of the Hegemon, and I gave it 3 stars. I did not really enjoy my time with this. It was just fine to have with me. It wasn't very good, in my opinion, and I don't really recommend it. These little kid characters are so annoying. These kids are so annoying and insufferable, and they have such a way about them that I'm just like, these are the most arrogant kids in the world. Okay, the next month I think is October. So in October, I read Shadow Puppets by Orson Scott Card. I own this book, and I was like, well, if I don't read it now, I'm never gonna read it. So I just read it, and I didn't really enjoy this either. So that's I'm closing the door on these books associated with Ender's Game, and I will be getting rid of this, to be honest. I read some books from NetGalley. I read Witchcraft, A Graphic History. You can see my whole exploration into this book in my NetGalley vlog, which I am genuinely surprised is not performing well as a video at all. But I did a lot of work for it, and anyway, so check that out if you want to. I ended up giving this 3 stars. I also read The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This was sad. This was sad because if society didn't spoil this story, this would be such a cool story to read for the first time. Anyway, but society has spoiled it, so it gets 4 stars instead of 5. Ooh, I also wish I owned this book. That's No Time to Spare by Ursula K. Le Guin. This was based on a recommendation from a viewer, and it was really good. It also has the perspective of an older woman, the woman being Ursula K. Le Guin, which is so cool because she's one of the greatest writers of science fiction. What are we doing over there? Yeah. Definitely recommend this. This is a collection of blog posts that she wrote when she was an older woman, and just her way of thinking and connecting things I really enjoyed, and her speaking about being elderly I also really enjoyed. I read a children's book called Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, and I loved this. I loved this so much. I gave it 5 stars. I just thought it was so cute. It's just a children's book, but I loved it. I also loved this children's book, They Work, by June Smalls. This is about honeybees. What are we doing in the pot? He's in the pot right now. These last 2 books were both also from NetGalley. But anyway, They Work was just such an excellently put together children's book about honeybees. So well done. I really appreciated all of the work that went into making that book. And I also got to read How to Talk to Your Succulent by Zoe Persico. This was also an e-arc from NetGalley, and I gave it 5 stars. This is a really cute middle grade graphic novel about overcoming, or I guess like a little bit about grief. It's about grief and miscommunication and being a good friend, being attentive and communicative, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was so good. 5 stars. And I read a big ass book. Surprisingly, so readable. I didn't know that this book would be so easy to read, but that was Kafka on the Shore by Haruki Murakami. I really enjoyed some aspects of this book, and I really didn't enjoy other aspects of this book. And in the end, I just didn't feel like I got it. Like I didn't get the point of it. And I ended up giving this 3 stars. But I am happy that I read it. Another e-arc from NetGalley was Lore of the Deep, which was an illustrated book about ocean folklore by Claire Koch-Starkey. And really cool stuff, really good for like a kid who's interested in like mythology. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I thought it was good. It was good. Frieren, Beyond Journey's End, Volume 6. Again, super into it at this point. I gave it 5 stars. I read a play by Eugene O'Neill called The Hairy Ape, and I gave this 4 stars. Really weirdly conflicted about how to feel about it, what it was trying to say, but it was good. It was a good play. Gave me a lot to think about. And I also read Disillusionment by Thomas Mann, which is a short story. It is the short story that the song sung by Peggy Lee, Is That All There Is based on. And I love that song to absolute pieces, and I think it heightened my enjoyment of this story quite a bit, and I gave it 5 stars. And I also read A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett, who wrote The Secret Garden. And it's so funny that I saw by absolute chance, I had already purchased this book from the Friends of the Library sale, and I saw a Instagram reel that was like, shout out to that era of, I don't know if it was like Disney movies or what, but it was like an era of movies that were about like orphan children. And anyway, I kind of got a spoiler for this book from this video that I just like, it just popped up. And anyway, I enjoyed my time with this. I thought it was just cute. It's just cute. I kind of associate it with Anne of Green Gables in my mind, like, but this one's a lot drearier, and also her perspective, it's a little weird, it's a little more preachy, and I feel like a little bit less realistic, if I'm being honest. I also read Our Wild Garden by Daniel Seton, which is another book that I got from NetGalley as an e-arc. It is a children's picture book all about creating a garden that supports wildlife, and I love the idea of doing that, but the execution I just wasn't fully on board with in this story. But I did end up giving it 4 stars. A lot of that is because I really, really do think it's really important for everybody to do their part in supporting wildlife. Do just a little to undo the absolutely vast amounts of damage that we've done to ecosystems. Like, we can support life in our yards, even if they're small. November, we're almost done. We're almost done. We're in November now. And the first book that I have was also an e-arc, and I am so grateful to have received this from NetGalley and the publisher. That's The Hounding by Zenobi Purvis. And to be perfectly honest, the more that I sit on having read this book, the more I keep thinking about it, the more I feel like it's become a part of me. I gave this 4 stars because I was like, yeah, it was good. It was definitely good. It was very good. But I was like, I don't know. I don't think it was exactly my thing. And now, over time, I'm like, no, I think that was exactly my thing. And I think this is a 5 star. I think this is a 5 star, and I need to go back and like edit everything that I did. So I think I'm actually gonna do that now. It was really good. It's in England, on the Thames, this small town, and it's set in the past. These girls, they're orphans, and they're weird, they're peculiar, they're kind of rude. And there's this story that goes around the town that they can transform into dogs. And it's just such a cool story. I don't know. Then I read something that really disappointed me. That's Brooklyn by Colm Tobin. And I just, gosh, I don't know. There were certain parts of the story that I liked. I liked the ship travel. I thought that was good. Otherwise, I also kind of left feeling like, what was the point? Like, why did we go through this story? Like, what were we doing? It's a picture of an Irish immigrant and her experience in America and also in Ireland, and it just was not for me. This story was not for me. I give it 3 stars. But then I read a play that I had an absolute blast with. I had so much fun with this. That was Olympia by Ferenc Molnar. This was such a fun experience for me. Okay, I wrote a review for this. Okay, I'll let me read my review. Problematic in ways you might not expect. Horrifying, to be honest. But so gripping, I couldn't put it down. Princess's quips get me every time. It was like an episode of The Kardashians or something in some weird way. I just was so entertained by this play. But again, like I say, problematic in horrifying ways. Then I read Frieren Volume 7. I gave this 5 stars. I'm like fully on the Frieren train right now, so I'm so biased at the current moment. I'm like living for this series. I also read Volume 8 and I gave it 4 stars. I read Glow Rushes by Roberto Pumini. This is a middle grade story. This is about a sick child, and his father hires a painter to come live with them and paint his sick son's room, like paint the walls of the room. And this sick child hasn't been able to go out and experience the world. He is confined to his home, but he is so well read and has had so much exposure through like reading encyclopedias and stuff that he wants to depict the whole world on his walls with this painter. And so a lot of it is him and the painter initially just discussing how they're going to go about depicting the world, and then they get to painting, and this book destroyed me. This book, gosh, it was so good. It was so good. I really recommend it. I thought it was amazing. So 5 stars on that one. Flying Witch Volume 9. I didn't enjoy this. I give it 3 stars. It just was like weirdly disjointed. I don't know, they're like adding more characters in and I don't enjoy them. So I don't know. I might be done with Flying Witch. Who knows? I just finished this a couple days ago. That's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I enjoyed the beginning of this. I really did. I read a review that I thought fit how I felt quite a lot. And it's like the first bit makes sense. And then the middle bit, you're kind of like, okay. And then the last bit, you're like, what the hell are we talking about? I never knew. This book was a staple in my household because my dad was so into motorcycles, and like the family read this book, right? I did not know that this book was written by somebody who had schizophrenia, and that is quite an important part of this book. This book is definitely important, I should say, also. This is like a classic, and when it came out, it was very important, but at this point, it's just kind of weird. I ended up giving it 3 stars. I'm glad that I read it. I'm definitely glad that I read it, though. And then, what I just finished reading last night was Frieren Beyond Journey's End Volume 9, and I loved it. I'm so on board for what's going on in the series now, and I'm excited to read more of that. Strength to Love by Martin Luther King Jr. I am just trying to really get the most out of this, so I'm not rushing through it, but I love this. I'm loving this. I'm expecting this to be a 5-star. It's just so good, and I recommend that people read this. It's relevant to our modern day, even if you're not religious. I'm not a religious person, and I'm finding a lot of value out of that. I'm thinking I'll do a December reading wrap-up, perhaps, so that I can put this video out. I have to edit so much. You know, just look forward to seeing more of what I have to read. But anyway, that is all I have for you today. That was a lot for me to go through. I hope you got something out of it, and let me know what were your top like 3 books that you read this year. I'll also be filming a favorites video, which I didn't do last year, but I'll be doing that this year. I'm really excited to do that. And so subscribe if you want to see that happen. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, consider sharing it with a friend who you think would also enjoy it. Consider liking and subscribing, and I will be back again soon.